always thought the most painful betrayal would come from a partner, a spouse, a lover. But no, nothing prepares you for the moment your own children turn their backs on you like you're nothing more than a bad memory. The morning I found out I was folding laundry, mundane, boring, peaceful, the kind of moment you think is safe. My neighbor Martha stopped by with a plate of lemon bars. She always did that when she baked too much, and honestly, I appreciated the company more than the dessert. She chatted, smiled, then casually said, "You must be over the moon about Emily's wedding. I saw the photos, just stunning." Photos. Wedding. My daughter Emily. My stomach turned to ice. "What photos?" I asked, my voice trembling just enough for her to pause. Martha's face changed instantly, confused, worried. "Oh dear, I thought you were there." I wasn't. I hadn't even been told. Not a single phone call, not an invitation, not even a damn text. I excused myself, politely, calmly, and the second the door shut behind her, I collapsed. I sat on the kitchen floor, cradling my chest like I could physically hold together the pieces breaking apart inside me. My children, my own flesh and blood, had excluded me from one of the most important moments of their lives. I raised them on my own. Their father walked out when they were toddlers, and I worked double shifts, sacrificed every comfort, every luxury, just to give them a life full of opportunities. There were nights I didn't eat so they could. Days I stood on sore feet for hours, just so they wouldn't feel the absence of a parent who never cared enough to stay. And this was how they repaid me? I didn't even cry. Not right away. It was worse than grief. It was numbness. An emptiness so hollow it rang in my ears. It was the sound of decades of love, effort, and unconditional support being thrown into the gutter without a second glance. I called my son, Matthew. Straight to voicemail. I called Emily. Blocked. I sat there, staring at my phone like it had betrayed me too. That weekend I saw the pictures. They were everywhere. Instagram, Facebook, carefully curated snapshots of their smiling faces, the white dress, the champagne toasts, the father-daughter dance with a man who wasn't me. They had invited their father, the same man who hadn't sent them a birthday card in 15 years, the same man who vanished without a word and never looked back. I was erased, rewritten out of the story like I was never part of it to begin with. I thought for days, reliving every bedtime story, every packed lunch, every night spent in worry, every scraped knee I kissed better. It meant nothing to them. I was nothing to them, and that realization burned. But here's the thing about pain. Real, soul-crushing pain. It either destroys you or it transforms you. And I chose transformation. They thought they'd moved on, that I would just sit in my silence and fade into the background. But they forgot something vital. I held the power now, not just emotionally, legally, financially. They had no idea what was in my will, no idea what I had built, what I had saved, what I had planned. And when word got out that I was finalizing my estate, they came crawling, with fake smiles, with guilt in their eyes. But by then, I had a plan. One they wouldn't see coming, because if they were going to write me out of their lives, I was going to return the favor. Only this time, I'd make sure they felt every ounce of what they made me feel. This wasn't about revenge. Not exactly. This was justice. And justice has a long memory. The days that followed were a blur of questions, none with answers that made sense. I kept thinking, what had I done? Where did I go so wrong that my own children could shut me out of their lives so completely? I wasn't perfect, no parent is. But I was present. I was dependable. I was always there. Through heartbreaks, job interviews, failed exams, illnesses, and growing pains, I was the one constant they had. So why? The silence was more brutal than any confrontation. No apology, no explanation, not even a courtesy message. Just a deliberate decision to exclude me from a milestone I had dreamed of witnessing since the day they were born. A decision that rewrote everything we'd ever shared. I tried to understand. I scrolled through the wedding photos for clues, zoomed in on faces, tried to read their expressions like they might offer me a reason. But all I saw were smiles, genuine, effortless, happy. Happy without me. It wasn't just the pain of missing the wedding. That was the surface wound. The infection ran deeper. This was a clear message. They had chosen someone else. Their father, the man who vanished into thin air when things got hard, was the one they walked down the aisle with. And me? I was left behind like a chapter they didn't want to read aloud. It wasn't a mistake. It was intentional. The betrayal came in layers. Matthew had once called me in tears when his dad forgot his high school graduation. Emily had begged me to braid her hair the night before prom because you always make me feel calm, Mom. And now I was the ghost they'd buried before I was even gone. What made it worse, what made it humiliating, was the whispers. People in town talked. Not out of cruelty, but out of that toxic brand of sympathy that makes you feel like a tragic footnote in someone else's fairy tale. They'd say, maybe it was just a small ceremony, or maybe it was last minute. But we all knew better. I had been erased, intentionally. For weeks I couldn't eat. I'd stare at my phone, hoping, praying that one of them would call. Just one message, one acknowledgement that this was a mistake, or at the very least a moment of weakness. But all I got was silence. And silence, when it comes from your own children, feels like death in slow motion. Then came the moment that flipped the switch in me. It was a voicemail. Hey, Mom. Heard from Aunt Lisa that you're, working on your will. Hope everything's okay. Maybe we could swing by this weekend? Swing by. As if nothing had happened. As if I hadn't been discarded like trash just weeks before. They didn't want to see me. They wanted to see what they might inherit. It was the first time I truly felt the cold calculation behind their actions. Not just indifference, but strategy. They had cut me out of the wedding, likely under the belief I'd make it awkward or emotional. They hadn't wanted the truth of our history to interfere with the Instagram perfection of their curated life. And now that they suspected they had something to gain, here they were, circling like vultures. That's when the fog began to clear. That's when I saw everything for what it was. This wasn't about a misunderstanding. This wasn't about growing apart. This was about erasure, disrespect, selfishness. And I wasn't going to let it go unanswered. They had made a choice when they didn't invite me. Now it was my turn to make a choice. They thought they had the upper hand. They thought time and silence would wear me down, that I'd be so desperate to be back in their lives. I'd hand them everything just to hear the word Mom again. But they forgot something very important. I may have been heartbroken, but I was not weak. They had played their hand. Now it was time for me to play mine. At first I told myself it didn't matter. People go through phases, right? Maybe my kids were just lost in the whirlwind of their new lives, their new roles. Maybe it wasn't personal. Maybe they were just wrapped up in their own stuff. But deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't just about a wedding. This wasn't even about me being left out of their special day. It was about something far darker, more ingrained. The way they saw me. Or, more accurately, the way they didn't see me anymore. They hadn't just stopped inviting me to their events. They had stopped considering me at all. I wasn't part of their future plans. And that realization cut deeper than anything I'd ever experienced. You see, I didn't just lose a relationship with my children that day. I lost the years of sacrifice, the nights I spent in fear, wondering if I was doing enough to raise them right. The days spent trying to get ahead, working multiple jobs, just to make sure they never felt the weight of financial struggle. They didn't see those moments. They didn't see the sleepless nights when they were sick, or the hours I spent at parent-teacher conferences, fighting for their success. It was a betrayal, yes, but it was more than that. It was a rejection of everything I had ever been to, them. And that's the kind of wound that doesn't just heal with time. That kind of pain stays buried, festering, until you address it, and I had to address it. The more I thought about it, the more I realized something else, something even more painful. Their actions weren't just a reflection of how they felt about me. They were a reflection of how they felt about themselves. My children had grown entitled. They had become so used to receiving without giving, so accustomed to me being the one who showed up, that they never learned how to value the people who gave them everything. I wasn't just a mother to them. I was a resource, a safety net they could rely on when it was convenient. And when they no longer needed that, when they thought they had moved beyond the old me, they cast me aside without a second thought. It wasn't about the wedding. It was about me finally seeing the truth, that I had raised two people who were incapable of understanding what loyalty, love, and gratitude really meant. And now I saw how deep the rot ran. This wasn't just about one day of being overlooked. This was about the erosion of all the care, all the love, all the support I had poured into them. This wasn't a phase. This was a statement of who they had become. And that's when it hit me, the hardest lesson of all. I wasn't the only one who had been betrayed. They had betrayed themselves. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't have possibly realized, is that betrayal has a funny way of coming back full circle. That day when I got the call about my will, I realized one thing that chilled me to the bone. This wasn't just about hurt feelings. This was about power. Who had it, who didn't, and who would ultimately be left with nothing. I knew the way they were thinking. They thought they could ignore me, erase me, and when the time came, reap the rewards of what I had worked so hard for. They thought they could get away with it. But they were wrong. I had spent years quietly watching, learning, and most importantly, planning. They didn't know what I was capable of, or how much I had secured. They thought I was just an old woman, a ghost from their past they could leave behind. But they didn't realize one simple truth. I was the one who held the keys to their future. They wanted my inheritance. They wanted everything I had built, but they had never considered what I might do with it, what I might choose to leave behind. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about them, about the lessons they had refused to learn, the consequences they had avoided. If they wanted to walk away from me, then fine. But they would learn one way or another that nothing comes for free. I don't think they realized how dangerous it is to underestimate someone who's been pushed to their limits. The moment I knew they were coming to check on my will, I felt something shift within me. For years, I had been the quiet, forgiving mother, the one who let things slide. But now, I was done being passive. They had thought they could play me. They thought that by ignoring me, by cutting me out of their lives, they would win. But they had no idea what I had been preparing. I wasn't just going to hand them my money and assets like they expected. No. This was about something much deeper. This was about reclaiming my dignity. I spent the following days in silence, letting the anger and pain settle into clarity. I began to plan. I needed to make sure that when my children came to me, expecting to reap the benefits of my years of hard work, they wouldn't walk away with anything but regret. First, I began looking over my estate, the house, the savings, the investments I had made. Everything was in order, more than they realized actually. It wasn't just money. It was a life I had built alone, a testament to my strength and perseverance. They didn't deserve to inherit it. Not after everything. But that didn't mean I would leave them with nothing. I had other ideas. I made sure my lawyer was involved, someone I had known for years, someone I could trust. He was part of the plan, but only as a pawn. I didn't tell him everything. In fact, I told him very little. I just needed him to draft a legal document that would sound official, something that would get their attention. I wasn't just going to give them the usual token inheritance that families often pass down. I wasn't going to let them believe they could simply show up and take what they wanted. Then, I began to think about what I could do to teach them a lesson. Not just a financial one. That wouldn't be enough. No. This needed to be personal. It needed to hit them where it hurt the most. Their own sense of entitlement. Their disregard for the value of love and sacrifice. I decided to alter the will in a way they wouldn't see coming. I had two options. I could leave them something, but with conditions that would make them regret their behavior, Or I could leave them with nothing at all. But that wouldn't be enough. They would expect the money. They would expect the house. They might even be angry at first, but eventually they would move on with their lives. I needed to do something more permanent, something that would force them to face the truth of what they had done. So I took a step further. I set up a trust, one that would only be accessible if they met specific conditions they would never be able to fulfill. They would have to prove something intangible that I knew they were incapable of understanding. The ability to reflect on their actions, to truly acknowledge the pain they had caused. I included a clause in the will that required them to give a public apology. Not a simple, "I'm sorry," but a heartfelt public declaration of what they had done to me. Only then would they be eligible to receive any inheritance. I knew they would balk at that. They wouldn't be willing to humble themselves. They would never stoop so low, even if it meant losing everything. And that was exactly the point. The will was just a small part of my plan. It was the trap, the bait. The moment they stepped into my house, demanding what they thought was theirs, they would be met with a reality they never expected. The more I thought about it, the more the details fell into place. I knew they were going to try and manipulate me when they arrived. They would pretend to be concerned, pretend to care, but I would see right through it. I had spent my life watching their every move, learning their tells, their weak spots. I knew exactly how to play this game. The next step would be the hardest. I had to prepare myself for the moment when they walked through that door. The moment when their smug, entitled faces would reveal the true scope of their misunderstanding. When they would believe they had won, only to find out that the only thing they had truly earned was a lesson in humility. And that, I realized, would be the sweetest victory of all. The day they arrived was almost exactly as I'd predicted, calculated, rehearsed, and full of false concern. They had no idea what was waiting for them. It was a Saturday morning when they rang the doorbell. Matthew stood there, wearing that same overly casual expression he always wore when he was trying to mask his guilt. Emily was beside him, her hands clasped in front of her, eyes wide, the picture of innocence, though I could see the nervous energy bubbling beneath her surface. They thought they could walk in and smooth things over, that I would be desperate for a reconciliation. I could see it in their eyes. They thought they could charm me back, make me forget the pain, and somehow convince me to give them what they wanted. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood in the doorway, letting the silence linger between us. For a moment, they both looked confused. Then Emily stepped forward, her voice shaky. "Hi, Mom. We heard you were, finalizing your estate. Just wanted to make sure everything's okay." "Everything's fine," I said calmly, stepping aside to let them in. They hesitated for a fraction of a second, unsure whether this was some kind of trap. They were right to be cautious. I had learned long ago to play the part of the calm, collected mother, but underneath that exterior, a fire was simmering. I invited them to sit, offering drinks, but I wasn't offering comfort. They could tell. Something was different. The room felt heavier, the air thicker. There was no warm greeting, no easy conversation. The tension was palpable. "Let me cut to the chase," I said, my voice steady. "You've come here because you think I'm going to give you something. Because you think that somehow, despite everything, you're entitled to what I've built." Matthew's face faltered. He wasn't prepared for the directness. Emily's lips trembled slightly, and for the first time in a long while, I saw something in her eyes that resembled regret, maybe even fear. I walked over to the table and grabbed the document I had prepared. It was thick, printed on heavy paper, and it looked official. The lawyer had done his part. I placed it in front of them, sliding it across the table without saying a word. I watched as their hands reached for it almost instinctively. They knew, as well as I did, what this was. Emily opened the first page, her brow furrowing. "What is this?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "It's my will," I said, watching them both closely. "But it's not what you're expecting." Matthew's eyes darted between me and the page. His usual arrogance faltered. What do you mean, Mom? I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms, enjoying the moment of power. You want what's mine. You want to take from me without ever acknowledging what you've done, without ever admitting how you've hurt me. I've worked my whole life for this, and I'm not going to just hand it over to people who think they can erase me from their lives without consequence. Silence. The kind of silence that is thick and uncomfortable, where the weight of my words settled in, one by one. I could see Matthew's mind working, trying to come up with an excuse, but I wasn't giving him the chance. I've set up a trust. I continued. You're both named in it, but there's a condition. Actually, there are several conditions. They both stared at the document, their faces pale. Emily's voice cracked slightly as she asked, Conditions? What do you mean? You'll only receive anything if you do one thing. If you publicly apologize for the way you've treated me. If you admit, openly and without reservation, that you've discarded me like I was nothing. If you apologize for treating me like a ghost. And only then, only when you've truly acknowledged how much you've hurt me, will you see a single cent of what I've left. Their reactions were immediate. Matthew's face reddened, his jaw clenched. Emily shifted uncomfortably in her seat, glancing at him, as if waiting for him to take charge. But it wasn't going to be that easy. I don't think you realize what you're asking, Matthew finally said, his voice rising, anger creeping in. You can't seriously expect us to do that. We didn't even... No, I interrupted, my voice cool. You don't get to decide what's fair anymore. You lost that right the day you chose to leave me out of your wedding, the day you erased me from your lives. You don't get to walk in here, pretend to care, and expect everything to be handed to you. I could see the panic starting to creep into their eyes. They thought they had me figured out. They thought they could play the role of the loving, children who wanted to mend things, who just needed the right excuse to get what they wanted. But I had flipped the script. Now they were on the defensive. I stood up slowly, walking over to the window and looking outside. You'll never understand, will you? I said, turning back to them. You'll never understand what it's like to be left behind, to be treated like you don't matter. But you will understand the consequences. Because when you don't meet my conditions, when you refuse to make things right, everything you thought you were entitled to will be gone. The silence that followed felt final. They had no words left. They could see it now, the price of their betrayal. They had no choice but to accept what I had laid out. And the truth was, they had already lost. It had been weeks since they left my house that day. The silence that followed was deafening, and I could feel the tension in the air every time I thought about the conversation we'd had. I wasn't expecting them to come around easily. No one changes overnight, and I knew it would take time for them to grasp the reality of what they had lost. In the beginning, I felt a sense of victory. I had done what I needed to do. I had taken back control, stood firm in the face of their entitlement, and made it clear that I wasn't someone to be discarded without consequence. The document, the trust, the conditions, they were all in place. The trap was set. But deep down, I knew this wouldn't be over until they had one last choice to make. The call came on a Friday afternoon. Unexpected, but inevitable. I saw Matthew's name flash across my phone screen. My first instinct was to ignore it. But then I realized something. If they were calling now, it was because they were desperate. The reality of their situation had finally hit them. They weren't going to get what they thought they could take. They were going to have to face the truth. I answered the phone. Mom. Matthew's voice was tight, and there was a noticeable crack in it. We've talked about it. Emily and we've been thinking about what you said, and we're sorry. We're sorry for the way we treated you. We shouldn't have pushed you away like we did, and we regret not having you there for the wedding. We know we hurt you. I closed my eyes, letting the words sink in. They were exactly what I had wanted to hear. But something in the way he said it, the hesitation, the forced nature of the apology, told me it wasn't coming from a place of genuine remorse. This wasn't the catharsis I had hoped for. It was just words, empty and hollow. Do you understand what I'm asking for? I asked, my voice steady. This isn't just about saying sorry. It's about you fully acknowledging what you did. It's about you showing the world that you've learned something from this, that you understand the depth of the pain you caused me. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, Matthew spoke again, his voice flat. We understand. We'll do it. We'll do whatever it takes to get the inheritance. We'll publicly apologize, on social media if you want. We'll do it. Just please don't leave us with nothing. His words hung in the air like a weight, and I could feel the reality of it all settle in. They had never truly cared about me, not in the way I had cared for them. They didn't want reconciliation. They didn't want healing. They just wanted what they could get out of me. But they didn't know I had already made my decision. I had anticipated this moment. And now, I would finally make them face the consequences of their actions. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, before I spoke. You think this is about money, don't you? You think that all I wanted was an apology so I could give you everything you've ever asked for. But you're wrong, Matthew. You've missed the point entirely. He sounded confused. What do you mean? I said, my voice unwavering, that I'm not going to give you anything. Not a penny. Not a cent. You made your choice, and now you'll live with the consequences of that choice. You won't get my money. You won't get my house. You'll get nothing. I've already updated my will. You're out. All of it is going to charity. I'm not giving you anything. And I want you to know, I'm not doing this out of spite. I'm doing this because you need to understand something. People don't get to treat others like you treated me and walk away without consequences. The kananain silence that followed was the most deafening sound I had ever heard. Matthew didn't speak for a long while. I knew the words had hit him, but they hadn't hit him hard enough. You're serious? He finally whispered. You're really doing this? I didn't need to say anything more. He already knew. I don't need your apology, I continued. I needed to know that you would own your actions, that you would understand the depth of what you did. And now I see that you never will. You'll live with this for the rest of your life. You'll live with the fact that you chose money and selfishness over the people who loved you, over your mother. And with that, I ended the call. There was nothing more to say. Weeks later, I received a call from the lawyer. The trust had been executed, and the donations to various charities had been finalized. The accounts, the investments, everything had been redirected. My children had no claim to it. They never would. It was the final step in my journey. And as I sat in my quiet house, I realized something. This wasn't about the money. This wasn't about making them suffer. It was about me reclaiming my peace. I had taken back control. I had confronted the betrayal and made sure it would never be forgotten. They would never get the inheritance. But I had something far more valuable. Had closure.